Lisa had always loved the solitude of her apartment. Perched on the second floor of an old building, it offered a quiet escape from the city's noise. Tonight was no different, just her, a cup of tea and a book, wrapped in the comfort of her dimly lit living room. Outside, the streetlights flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. It was the kind of night that felt peaceful, the kind where nothing unusual ever happened. That was until she noticed the movement outside her window. At first, it was just a flicker, something in the corner of her eye. She turned her head sharply, but there was nothing, just the glass pane reflecting her own face, the faint glow of her lamp behind her. She exhaled, shaking off the momentary unease, probably just her imagination, maybe a branch swaying from the wind. Except there were no trees outside her window. She frowned and leaned forward, pressing her palm against the cold glass. The street below was empty, just an occasional car passing in the distance. Still, something felt off. Her skin prickled as if unseen eyes were on her. She reached for her phone, scrolling through messages to distract herself. A soft tap against the glass froze her in place. Her breath hitched, fingers tightening around her phone. Slowly, her eyes lifted back to the window, pulse hammering against her ribs. She saw nothing but her own reflection, her own wide eyes staring back. Another tap. This time, the sound was deliberate, measured, like someone was knocking. Lisa's stomach twisted as cold fear crept up her spine. Her apartment was on the second floor. There was no balcony, no ledge, nothing a person could stand on. She swallowed hard, telling herself to be rational. Maybe it was a bird. Maybe a shadow shifted against the glass. Her entire body locked up. There was something there. She couldn't see it clearly, but she could feel it. A dark smudge in the reflection, something behind her, something standing just outside the reach of her dim lamp. Lisa turned her head, her breath stalling in her throat. The room was empty. Her reflection, however, was not. She saw it now, a figure standing just behind her in the glass. Tall, gaunt, features blurred, as if the glass itself refused to capture its form. But there was one thing she could see clearly. Its eyes. They were staring straight at her. The air turned thick, suffocating. Lisa's body screamed at her to move, to run, to do anything but stand there. But she was frozen, trapped in the realization that whatever was in that reflection did not belong in her world. Her phone vibrated violently in her hand, the sudden sound nearly making her scream. She forced herself to look down. It was a text message. Her stomach dropped. The message was from her own number. It read, "Turn around." Lisa's breath hitched, her vision blurring as terror gripped her entire being. The reflection in the glass slowly tilted its head, and then, ever so slightly, it smiled. It had been a long day for Emma. Between work, errands, and taking care of her 6-month-old daughter, Lily, exhaustion clung to her like a heavy blanket. Finally, after a warm bottle and some gentle rocking, Lily had drifted off to sleep in her crib. Emma placed the baby monitor on the nightstand and curled up in bed, letting the hum of white noise from the monitor soothe her. She wasn't sure how long she had been asleep when she woke to a faint whispering. Her drowsy mind barely registered the sound at first. The monitor crackled softly, the static blending with hushed words, too soft to make out. Emma turned onto her side, eyes still heavy with sleep, but then she heard it again, a voice, low, raspy, speaking just above a whisper. She sat up abruptly, heart pounding. The room was dark, save for the dim glow of the baby monitor's screen. Emma reached for it with trembling fingers, bringing it closer. The camera feed showed Lily sleeping soundly, her tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. The crib was empty, except for her. And yet, someone was whispering. Emma's stomach twisted. The sound was coming from inside Lily's room. She turned up the volume, straining to hear. The whispers were rhythmic, deliberate. Her skin prickled as she made out a tune, soft, eerie, like an old lullaby sung in a breathless rasp. A cold dread settled over her. Someone was in there. Emma threw off her blankets, her legs shaking as she rushed to Lily's room. The door was ajar, just as she had left it, and the dim glow of the nightlight painted soft shadows across the walls. She reached for the switch, flicking on the overhead light. The whispering stopped instantly. She stood frozen in the doorway, chest heaving. The room was empty. Lily stirred but remained asleep, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blanket. Emma forced herself to step forward, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She checked under the crib, the closet, even behind the curtains. Nothing. Swallowing hard, she backed away, trying to convince herself it had been some sort of interference. Maybe a neighbor's radio or a crossed signal. That had to be it. She turned off the light, casting the room back into its gentle darkness, and returned to her bed. For a long time, she lay there, clutching the monitor, her nerves raw. Eventually, exhaustion. Her eyelids grew heavy, and sleep pulled her under. The monitor crackled again. Emma's eyes fluttered open. The whispering was back. Her breath caught in her throat as she heard it. Closer this time. Not from the monitor, but from inside her own room. A voice, hoarse and inhuman, murmured right next to her ear, "Not yet. Soon." It started as a joke. Nathan was home alone for the weekend, and his friends had been bombarding him with texts about horror movies and urban legends. To mess with them, he sent a message to their group chat. "If anything happens to me, check under my bed." He grinned as he sent it, expecting a flood of laughing emojis. Instead, his phone buzzed once with a reply from his best friend Jake. "Not funny, dude." Nathan shrugged, tossing his phone onto the nightstand. The house was quiet, just the distant hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. He settled into bed, pulling the covers up to his chest, and stared at the ceiling. Just as he was drifting off, a faint scratching sound snapped him awake. He blinked, listening. The noise was soft, intermittent, like something dragging against wood. It was coming from beneath his bed. A chill crawled up his spine, but he forced a chuckle. Probably a mouse, he told himself. Or maybe the house settling. Still, the thought of something lurking in the darkness, just inches below him, made his skin crawl. The scratching stopped. Nathan exhaled, feeling ridiculous. He grabbed his phone to text Jake back, but as he lifted it, his fingers fumbled and the device slipped from his grasp. It landed with a soft thud on the floor, right at the edge of the bed. Nathan groaned and rolled onto his stomach, reaching down blindly. His hand groped along the wooden floor, feeling for the phone, then stopped. Something touched him. A cold, dry hand grabbed his wrist. Nathan's blood turned to ice. His breath hitched in his throat as long fingers tightened around his skin. Too strong, too deliberate to be a mistake. His entire body seized with terror. He yanked his arm back with all his strength, scrambling away, his heart slamming against his ribs. He lunged for the lamp, flipping it on. His wide eyes darted around the room. Nothing. His phone was lying undisturbed on the floor. Slowly, breath shaking, he forced himself to peer under the bed. Darkness. Just dust and empty space. No sign of anyone. No hand. No presence. But as he reached down to grab his phone, the screen lit up with an unsent message. A message that he hadn't typed. "He's here." It was nearly midnight when Olivia locked the front door and double-checked the windows. Living alone wasn't scary, at least not usually, but tonight something felt off. The house was too quiet. She tried to shake it off, blaming exhaustion. It had been a long, grueling day at work, and all she wanted was to collapse into bed, scroll through her phone for a bit, and pass out. Still, as she moved through the dimly lit hallway, the feeling of unease lingered, crawling up her spine like unseen fingers, trailing over her skin. Just as she was about to turn off the lights, a thump echoed from upstairs. Olivia's heart stuttered in her chest. She froze, listening. It wasn't the usual creak of the house settling. It was heavier, deliberate. Her first thought was that she had left a window open and the wind had knocked something over. But as she strained her ears, the silence stretched, thick and unnatural. Her skin prickled. Another thump, closer this. A cold dread settled in her stomach. She wasn't imagining. Someone was up there. Slowly, she crept toward the staircase, gripping her phone tightly. She hovered her finger over the emergency dial screen, her pulse thudding against her ribs. "Hello," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving toward the stairs. Olivia's breath hitched. She backed away, her mind racing. The doors were locked, the windows were shut. No one should be inside, and yet they were. A sharp chill settled over her skin as the footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. She could feel it, something watching her. She took another step back, her fingers tightening around her phone. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her head. Could it be an intruder? A burglar? Should she run? Call the cops? Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. She needed to get out. Heart hammering, she turned on her heel and bolted for the front door. Her fingers fumbled with the lock, adrenaline making them clumsy. Just as she yanked it open, the footsteps stopped. The house felt eerily silent. She hesitated, one foot outside, the other still inside the threshold. She knew she should keep running, get to her car, call the police, but something felt wrong. The silence wasn't normal. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. And then, from upstairs, a voice, her voice. "Don't leave. It's already inside." A slow, creeping horror curled through her chest as realization clawed its way into her mind. The voice wasn't coming from someone else. It was coming from her bedroom. Olivia stood frozen in the doorway, every muscle locked in place. The air around her grew heavy, pressing in like an unseen force. Then, soft movement, the creak of a floorboard. She didn't want to look, but her body betrayed her. Her gaze drifted upward, toward the darkened stairwell. And there, at the top of the stairs, barely visible in the shadows, a figure stood. It was her, or rather something that looked like. It was eerily still, its head tilted slightly as if studying her. The dim glow from the hallway light caught its face, her face, but something was wrong. Its eyes were too dark, too deep, as if they were hollow voids that stretched far beyond what should be possible. Its mouth was curling into a slow, unnatural smile. Olivia's breath came out in a ragged gasp. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the threshold. The thing that wore her face took a step forward. A deep, gurgling whisper slithered down the stairs. "Why are you leaving?" The voice was her own, yet not. It was layered, distorted, as if something else was speaking alongside it. Olivia turned and ran. She didn't stop. Not when she reached her car, not when she fumbled with the keys, not even when she sped away, tires screeching against the pavement. Only when she was miles away did she dare to glance in the rearview mirror, dreading what she might see. But the road behind her was empty. Her house, now just a dark speck in the distance, sat still and quiet, too quiet. And then her phone buzzed in her lap, a single message from her own number. "You shouldn't have left." It started with a knock, not the loud, impatient kind. No, this was different, soft, deliberate, almost polite. Ethan had been home alone for only a few hours, settling in for a quiet night with a horror movie and a frozen pizza. His parents were out of town for the week, and while the idea of being alone in the house at night made him uneasy, he wasn't the type to scare easily. At first, he thought he had imagined it. Then, the knock came again. 3 slow, rhythmic taps against the front door. Ethan muted the TV, his body tensing. He wasn't expecting anyone. His parents wouldn't be back until Monday, and his friends knew better than to just show up unannounced. He grabbed his phone and hesitated. Should he check? Ignore it? Call someone? Another knock. Closer this time. His stomach clenched, not against the door anymore. It came from the window. A sickening chill crept up his spine. Slowly, he turned his head toward the living room window, the one facing the porch. His breath caught in his throat. A figure stood outside, barely visible through the glass. It was tall, thin, and unmoved. Ethan's first instinct was to jump up and turn on every light in the house. But something about the way the figure stood, completely motionless, made his blood run cold. It didn't shift. It didn't sway. It just stood there. Then, without warning, the porch light flickered. For a brief second, the figure's face was illuminated. Ethan's stomach lurched. It wasn't a face at all. The skin was smooth, like a blank canvas, stretched too tightly over the skull. No eyes, no mouth, just a featureless, pale surface where a face should have been. The light flickered again, and it was gone. Ethan's body snapped into action. He grabbed his phone, fingers trembling as he pulled up his best friend's number. He didn't care if it was a prank. He didn't care if he looked stupid. Someone had been watching. As he pressed call, something moved in his peripheral vision. A shape inside the house, standing in the hallway. Ethan's throat tightened. His entire body locked up, his heartbeat pounding in it. The figure was there, inside. It hadn't entered through the door. It hadn't broken a window. It had just appeared. The TV screen flickered, casting a dim, shifting glow across the room. In that uneven light, Ethan could make out the thing's body, tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs too long for its frame. It took a step forward. Ethan bolted. He didn't think. His body moved on instinct. He sprinted up the stairs, slamming the door to his bedroom shut behind him. His chest heaved as he stumbled backward, searching desperately for something to block the door. His closet, the desk, the dresser, anything. Then, tap. Software deliberate. It wasn't at the door. Ethan turned slowly, his stomach twisting. The sound had come from the window, his second-floor window. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he forced himself to look. The figure was there, its featureless face pressed against the glass. Ethan didn't scream. He couldn't. The air had been stolen from his lungs, his body frozen in sheer, paralyzing terror. Then, slowly, horribly, it raised one hand. It knocked. 3 slow, rhythmic taps against the glass. Ethan scrambled for his phone, blindly hitting redial. His friend Jake answered almost immediately. "Dude?" Jake's voice was groggy. "What's wrong?" Ethan tried to speak, but nothing came out. His gaze was locked on the figure outside, unmoving, waiting. A second passed, then another. Then Jake said something that turned Ethan's blood to ice. "Wait, why are you whispering?" Ethan's throat closed. His shaking hand moved his phone away from his ear. He hadn't spoken, and yet, through the speaker, a voice exactly like his own whispered, "Let me in." It started with a knock, not the loud, impatient kind. No, this was different, soft, deliberate, almost polite. Ethan had been home alone for only a few hours, settling in for a quiet night with a horror movie and a frozen pizza. His parents were out of town for the week, and while the idea of being alone in the house at night made him uneasy, he wasn't the type to scare easily. At first, he thought he had imagined it. Then, the knock came again. 3 slow, rhythmic taps against the front door. Ethan muted the TV, his body tensing. He wasn't expecting anyone. His parents wouldn't be back until Monday, and his friends knew better than to just show up unannounced. He grabbed his phone and hesitated. Should he check? Ignore it? Call someone? Another knock. Closer this time. His stomach clenched. Not against the door anymore. It came from the window. A sickening chill crept up his spine. Slowly, he turned his head toward the living room window, the one facing the porch. His breath caught in his throat. A figure stood outside, barely visible through the glass. It was tall, thin, and unmoved. Ethan's first instinct was to jump up and turn on every light in the house. But something about the way the figure stood, completely motionless, made his blood run cold. It didn't shift. It didn't sway. It just stood there. Then, without warning, the porch light flickered. For a brief second, the figure's face was illuminated. Ethan's stomach lurched. It wasn't a face at all. The skin was smooth, like a blank canvas, stretched too tightly over the skull. No eyes, no mouth, just a featureless, pale surface where a face should have been. The light flickered again, and it was gone. Ethan's body snapped into action. He grabbed his phone, fingers trembling as he pulled up his best friend's number. He didn't care if it was a prank. He didn't care if he looked stupid. Someone had been watching. As he pressed call, something moved in his peripheral vision. A shape inside the house, standing in the hallway. Ethan's throat tightened. His entire body locked up, his heartbeat pounding in it. The figure was there, inside. It hadn't entered through the door. It hadn't broken a window. It had just appeared. The TV screen flickered, casting a dim, shifting glow across the room. In that uneven light, Ethan could make out the thing's body. Tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs too long for its frame. It took a step forward. Ethan bolted. He didn't think. His body moved on instinct. He sprinted up the stairs, slamming the door to his bedroom shut behind him. His chest heaved as he stumbled backward, searching desperately for something to block the door. His closet, the desk, the dresser, anything. Then, tap. Software deliberate. It wasn't at the door. Ethan turned slowly, his stomach twisting. The sound had come from the window, his second-floor window. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he forced himself to look. The figure was there, its featureless face pressed against the glass. Ethan didn't scream. He couldn't. The air had been stolen from his lungs, his body frozen in sheer, paralyzing terror. Then, slowly, horribly, it raised one hand. It knocked. 3 slow, rhythmic taps against the glass. Ethan scrambled for his phone, blindly hitting redial. His friend Jake answered almost immediately. "Dude?" Jake's voice was groggy. "What's wrong?" Ethan tried to speak, but nothing came out. His gaze was locked on the figure outside, unmoving, waiting. A second passed, then another. Then Jake said something that turned Ethan's blood to ice. "Wait, why are you whispering?" Ethan's throat closed. His shaking hand moved his phone away from his ear. He hadn't spoken, and yet, through the speaker, a voice exactly like his own whispered, "Let me in." It started with a whisper. At first, Kara thought it was the wind, just the old house settling, the trees outside rustling against the windows. But as she sat curled up on the couch, flipping through TV channels, she heard it again, software muffled, right behind her. "Kara!" Her breath caught in her throat. She whipped her head around, heart pounding, but the living room was empty. The only sound was the low hum of the TV. She tried to shake it off. She was home alone, after all. Her parents were away for the weekend, and she'd been alone plenty of times before. Maybe she was just imagining things. But as she reached for the remote, she felt it, a cold breath against the back of her neck. Kara bolted from the couch, spinning wildly. The room was still empty. The windows were shut, the doors locked. Her phone sat on the coffee table. She grabbed it with shaking hands, flipping on the flashlight. She knew she should check the house. She had to. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the hallway. The light from her phone cut through the darkness, illuminating the old wooden floorboards and the stairwell leading to the second floor. The air felt heavier, thicker. She reached the base of the stairs and hesitated. She didn't want to go up there, but something in her gut told her she had to. Another whisper, "Upstairs." Her stomach twisted. Slowly, carefully, she placed her foot on the first step, then the second. The wood groaned beneath her weight. Halfway up, her phone screen glitched. The flashlight flickered. Then the battery icon popped up. 5% left. Her phone had been fully charged. A click. The hallway light at the top of the stairs turned on by itself. Kara's breath came in short, shallow gasps. The bulb flickered weakly, casting sickly yellow light over the second floor. And then she saw it. The attic door. It was open. Kara's blood ran cold. The attic door had been shut earlier. She was sure of it. She stared at the gaping darkness above, every instinct screaming at her to run. But her feet refused to move. Then, a sound. Something moving up there. A slow, deliberate dragging noise. And then, thump. Something fell. Kara took a shaky step back, but before she could turn and run, a hand shot out of the attic. It was long, pale, and wrong. The fingers were too many, too thin, too sharp. It curled around the edge of the attic opening, pressing into the wood, and then a second hand. Something was crawling down. Kara screamed. She turned and ran, nearly tumbling down the stairs. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she bolted toward the front door. But then, every door in the house slammed shut. A sharp, deafening bang that shook the walls. Kara stumbled, gasping. She grabbed the doorknob, yanking with all her strength. Locked. A whisper, right in her ear. "Don't leave." She turned, and standing in the middle of the living room herself. But it wasn't her. It had her face, her body, her clothes, but the eyes were black voids. It smiled, and then, in her own voice, it whispered, "You let me." It started with a phone call. Avery had just settled in for the night, locking the doors and double-checking the windows. Her parents were out of town, and though she wasn't afraid of being home alone, she always took extra precaution. She was halfway through a horror movie when her phone rang. Unknown number. She frowned. Probably a scam. She declined the call and went back to her movie. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Her stomach tightened. This time, she let it ring out. Then, a notification popped up. One new voicemail. She hesitated before pressing play. At first, there was only silence. Then, a slow, shallow breathing. And then, "I see you." Avery's breath hitched. She turned off the movie and sat up, scanning the room. See me? From where? She stood and moved to the window, peeking through the curtains. The street was quiet. No cars, no people. Another buzz. New text message from unknown number. "Why did you look outside?" Her pulse pounded. This wasn't a prank. Someone was watching her. Avery's hands trembled as she typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came instantly. "Come outside and find out." She dropped her phone. Number, no way. She ran to the front door, making sure the deadbolt was locked. Then she grabbed a kitchen knife, her hands slick with sweat. Another text. "I'm already inside." Avery's blood ran cold. Her eyes darted around the house. She had locked everything, checked every door, every window. There was no way. Then she heard it. A soft creak from upstairs. Her whole body went rigid. She wasn't alone. Her mind screamed for her to run, to get out of the house, but her feet refused to move. Another creak. Closer this. Avery backed away, gripping the knife tighter. She reached for her phone and quickly typed, "I'm calling the police." The reply was instant. "They won't get here in time." The blood drained from her face. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the stairs. Avery's breath hitched. She turned toward the back door, ready to make a run for it, but before she could take a step, her phone buzzed again. A picture message. With shaking hands, she opened it. The photo showed her, standing in the living room, knife in hand, from behind her. Avery's body went ice cold. The footsteps stopped. The air in the room shifted. A slow, suffocating silence pressed down on her, like something was waiting, watching. Then, a whisper, right against her ear. Too late. It started with a knock at the window. Caleb nearly dropped his phone. It was almost midnight, and he was home alone, sprawled across the couch, scrolling mindlessly through his feed. At first, he thought he imagined it. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. His stomach twisted. His house was in the middle of a quiet suburban neighborhood, and his living room window faced the backyard, completely fenced in. No one should be back there. Slowly, he sat up, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The curtains were closed. He debated whether to check. Maybe it was just a tree branch tapping in the wind. Then, his phone vibrated. A new message. Unknown. Number. "I saw you move." Caleb's skin went cold. He swallowed hard and typed back. "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, typing. Then, "Come see." A deep, gnawing dread spread through him. He forced himself to stand, gripping the phone so tight his fingers ached. Step by step, he edged toward the window. His breath caught in his throat as he gently pulled the curtain aside. Darkness. The backyard stretched out in eerie silence, the faint glow of the porch light casting long shadows across the grass. Nothing. Caleb exhaled in relief. Just his imagination. Then, his phone buzzed again. Another message, a photo. He clicked on it, and the air in his lungs vanished. The picture was of his backyard, taken from right outside the window, and in the bottom corner, a hand, long fingers, pale skin, pressed against the glass. Caleb's stomach lurched. He whipped around, but the window was empty. No hand, no movement. His phone buzzed again. "Why did you look away?" A cold, prickling sensation crept up his spine. He took a shaky step back. Then, he heard it. The back door creaked open. Caleb froze. He had locked it. He knew he had locked it. A slow, deliberate footstep echoed from the kitchen. Then, another. Someone was inside. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead. He could hear it moving, slow, careful, like it was savoring every second. Then, the worst sound of all, breathing. Right behind him, Caleb's vision blurred with terror. His body refused to move, his muscles locked in place. Then, a whisper. "I told you not to look away!" The lights flickered. The last thing Caleb saw was his own reflection in the window, and behind him, a grinning face that wasn't his own. It started with the voices in the vents. Mia had never paid much attention to the old air ducts running through her house. They groaned when the heat kicked in and rattled on windy nights. But that was normal. At least, that's what she had always told herself. But tonight was different. She had just finished a late-night study session, yawning as she shut her laptop. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then, a whisper. Mia froze. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. A voice, coming from the air vent. She slowly turned her head toward the vent near the floor. It was just a metal grate, the same as always. But now, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from within. She swallowed hard. Maybe it was just her mind playing tricks on her. Then, the whisper came again. "Mia, I know you're awake." A chill crept up her spine. Her first instinct was to grab her phone, but when she reached for it, new message from unknown. Number, don't move. Mia's breathing hitched. Her fingers trembled over the screen. Who was this? Another message. You're listening, aren't you? She jerked her head toward the vent again, her pulse hammering. The air inside it suddenly felt too dark, too deep. Then, a scraping sound, like nails against metal. Mia's stomach twisted. The sound was getting closer. She couldn't take it anymore. In one frantic motion, she leapt up, grabbing a flashlight from her desk. Heart pounding, she aimed the beam at the vent and crouched down. Her hand shook as she reached forward. The vent cover slid open on its own. Mia let out a strangled gasp, scrambling backward. The vent yawned open, revealing pure blackness, a space too large to make sense, a tunnel leading into something endless. Then, from the shadows, a hand crawled out. Thin, skeletal fingers gripped the edge of the vent, then another. Then a face, not human, too wide, too stretched. Its mouth curled into an impossibly large grin, filled with rows of tiny, jagged teeth. Mia couldn't breathe, then it spoke. "I've been waiting for it." The last thing she saw before the flashlight flickered out was it crawling toward her. It started with a missing chair. Ethan had always been a little paranoid about staying home alone. He wasn't afraid of the dark or ghosts. He just hated the feeling that someone else could be in the house without him knowing. So every night before bed, he made sure everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Doors locked, windows shut, chairs tucked neatly under the dining table. But tonight, as he passed by the dining room on his way to the kitchen, he stopped. One of the chairs was missing. Ethan frowned. He counted them. 1, 2, 3. The fourth chair was gone. His heart thumped unevenly. He tried to think logically. Maybe he had forgotten to put it back after lunch. Maybe he had moved it earlier and just didn't remember. Then, a soft scraping sound. His blood ran cold. It came from the hallway. Slow, deliberate, like wood dragging against the floor. Ethan whipped around, and there it was, the missing chair, sitting right in the middle of the hallway. Ethan's breath came in short gasps. How? He had just walked through that hallway minutes ago, and the chair wasn't there. His phone buzzed in his pocket. New message from unknown number. Sit down. A deep, ice-cold dread seeped into his bones. He took a step back. His mind screamed at him to run, to get out of the house. But something about the chair felt wrong, like it was waiting. Another text. I said, sit down. Ethan swallowed, his hands clammy. He turned toward the front door, ready to bolt. Then the lights flickered, and in the brief moment of darkness, the chair moved closer, right in front of him. His breath hitched. He could barely think. He had to get out. Now, another text. A picture. With shaking fingers, Ethan opened it. It was a photo of the chair, but this time someone was sitting in it, a figure. Tall, thin, wrong. Their head was tilted at an unnatural angle, their face blurred, distorted. But the worst part? The photo was taken from right behind him. Ethan's heart stopped. A whisper breathed against his ear. Sit down. The lights went out. It started with the bathroom mirror. Jenna had never been afraid of her own reflection. She didn't believe in Bloody Mary or any of those stupid urban legends. But that night, as she brushed her teeth before bed, something felt off. She couldn't explain it. The bathroom was dimly lit, the soft hum of the fan droning overhead. But as she lifted her head after rinsing her mouth, she froze. Her reflection didn't move. For a split second, just a fraction of a second, her mirrored self stared back at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Then, as if nothing had happened, it caught up, mimicking her perfectly, once more. Jenna's chest tightened. Did she imagine that? Her pulse thumped against her ears. She stepped closer to the mirror, searching her own face. Everything looked normal, but something in her gut screamed that it wasn't. Her phone vibrated on the counter. New message from unknown number. Don't turn off the light. A chill slithered down her spine. She stared at the screen, heart hammering. Who the hell was this? Before she could react, the bathroom light flickered. Then, it went out. Jenna gasped, spinning toward the switch. She flicked it frantically, but the darkness remained. Her breathing grew uneven. Then she heard it. A soft tap against the mirror, like a fingernail dragging across the glass. She turned back slowly, a cold sweat breaking out on her skin. She couldn't see a thing in the pitch-black bathroom, but she could hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Then, a whisper. Low, wrong. Let me out. Jenna's stomach lurched. She stumbled backward, blindly reaching for her phone to use the screen's glow. The second the dim light illuminated the mirror, her blood turned to ice. Her reflection was still staring at her. But her real self? She wasn't moving. She raised a trembling hand. Her reflection did not. Its lips curled into a grin. Finally, then, it stepped forward. Out of the mirror. Jenna screamed. The last thing she saw before the light flickered back on was her own reflection standing behind her, smiling, and her real self trapped inside the glass. It started with the old baby monitor. Ryan wasn't a parent. He didn't even like kids. The baby monitor was something he had found while cleaning out the attic of his rental house. An old, dusty thing with a bulky camera and a small screen. It probably hadn't been used in years, but something about it unsettled him. Maybe it was the way it turned on by itself when he picked it up, or the way the static-filled screen flickered, showing a dark, empty room. The house only had one bedroom, and Ryan sure as hell hadn't set up the camera anywhere. So, what was it recording? A chill crept up his arms as he stared at the screen. Then, the sound came. A faint, distorted breathing. Ryan's stomach twisted. The screen flickered again, and this time, there was movement. His pulse thundered in his ears. Something shifted in the darkness on the screen. The camera lens slowly adjusted, and for a brief moment, he swore he saw a figure, tall, motionless, standing in the shadows. Ryan's breath hitched. This had to be a joke. He grabbed the baby monitor and frantically twisted it over, looking for an off switch. His fingers fumbled over the old plastic. Then, a voice crackled through the speaker. I can see you too. Ryan's entire body went rigid. The screen flickered again, and this time, it showed his bedroom. The camera was inside his house, right behind him. The baby monitor slipped from his hands, crashing to the floor. His breathing was ragged, his mind screaming at him to move. Then, the speaker buzzed again. Turn around! Ryan couldn't, wouldn't. But then, he heard the floor creak, right behind him. The last thing he saw before the screen cut to black was the reflection of a grinning face in the monitor, and it wasn't his. It started with the knocking at 3 a.m. Lena lived alone in a small apartment on the third floor. No roommates, no visitors. And yet for the past 3 nights, she had been woken up by a soft, deliberate knocking at her front door, always at exactly 3 a.m. She had never been brave enough to check. Instead, she stayed in bed, heart pounding, clutching the covers to her chin as the knocking continued. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. Then, silence. Tonight, though, something felt different. She had fallen asleep with her phone in her hand, scrolling through messages when the first knock jolted her awake. She sucked in a sharp breath, eyes darting to the digital clock on her nightstand. 3 a.m. Lena's stomach twisted. She squeezed her phone, fingers trembling as she opened her camera app and slowly sat up in bed. The knocking came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Her breath hitched. Swallowing her fear, she turned on her camera and switched it to video mode. She aimed the lens at the front door, heart hammering in her chest. Then, with shaking hands, she pressed record. For a moment, nothing happened. The dim glow of the hallway light barely illuminated the door. Everything was still. Then, the doorknob turned. Lena clapped a hand over her mouth, stifling a scream. The door was locked. She had checked it before bed. The knob twisted again, more forcefully this time. Then, from behind the door, a whisper. Low. Wrong. I know you're awake. Lena's stomach lurched. Her fingers slipped, nearly dropping the phone, but she forced herself to keep recording. She wanted proof. She needed proof. Then, through the camera screen, she saw it. A shadow, not a person. Too tall, too stretched. Its limbs moved in a jerky, unnatural way, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. And then, it pressed its face against the peephole. Lena's phone screen glitched. The video feed flickered with static, warping the image. And for the briefest second, just a fraction of a second, she saw its face. Mouth too wide, eyes too black. And it was grinning. Then, the screen went dark. A new notification appeared. Video saved. But the timestamp? 2:59 a.m. 1 minute before she started recording. The knocking stopped. And then, the phone buzzed. New message from unknown number. Don't open the door. Lena didn't move, didn't breathe, because the message was sent from her own phone. It started with the voices in the baby monitor. Chris wasn't a superstitious guy. He didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or anything supernatural. But when his sister asked him to babysit his 1-year-old niece, Emma, for the night, he started to question everything. The evening had been normal. Emma had fallen asleep without a fuss, and Chris had settled into the couch to watch TV. But around midnight, the baby monitor crackled to life. At first, it was just static. Then, a whisper. Chris frowned. He turned the volume up. The whispering grew clearer. A voice, not Emma's, not his sister's. A man's voice. Low, raspy, wrong. She's awake. Chris's stomach dropped. The camera feed on the monitor was fuzzy, distorted. He squinted, trying to make out the crib. Emma was still lying there, unmoving. Asleep. Another whisper. Number, she's pretending. The hair on Chris's arms stood up. A shuffling sound came through the speaker. Software, like someone moving in. His blood ran cold. He grabbed his phone and pulled up the security app, switching to the nursery's live feed. The crib came into view. Emma was lying completely still. Too still. Her eyes were wide open. Chris's breath hitched. He tapped the screen, zooming in. Her tiny chest wasn't rising. She wasn't breathing. He bolted from the couch, heart pounding, racing down the hall to the nursery. He shoved the door open, and Emma gasped. Her little body jerked as if she had just been released from something holding her down. She started crying, arms flailing. Chris rushed forward, scooping her up, his entire body trembling. Then, the baby monitor crackled again. Chris turned slowly toward the screen. The static cleared, and for just a second, a figure stood behind the crib, tall, shadowed, unmoving. Chris's entire body went numb. Then, the screen went black. The whisper returned. She almost let me in. Chris didn't stay to listen. He grabbed Emma and ran.